Well, for more on this, we are now joined by economist Dominic Brown from the Economic Justice Program, Manager at the Alternative Information and Development Center. And our reporter, Ziniko Mhlaba, is joining us live. He is currently in the streets of Johannesburg, a wet morning here in Johannesburg. We'll be catching up with him in a short while to look into this question around the desperation of some people when it comes to finding work. But let's start off the conversation with Dominic. Dominic, a very good morning to you. Looking at the stats from the second quarter, as well as that indication that was given by the minister during his medium-term budget policy statement, that the GDP is now revised downwards. GDP growth is revised downwards from 1.3% to 1.1%. How bleak of a situation are we looking at ahead of the announcement of these results?
Hello?
Hi, Dominic. If you can hear me. Hi, Dominic, can you hear me? Okay, so I was asking you, how bleak of results do you think it is that we should be expecting later on today when the minister makes this announcement in terms of the data? Stats SA rather makes the announcement of the data, considering also on the other end that during the medium-term budget policy statement, the Minister of Finance has revised downwards the country's GDP growth from 1.3% to 1.1%.
Hi, Aldrin. Thanks to you and to the listeners. The first thing I want to say is that we can anticipate continued and persistent high levels of mass unemployment for the foreseeable future. The main reason is the structure of the South African economy, which I'll come to in a bit. The second point I want to make is that I think that it's important that in the media and in general, when we talk about the unemployment crisis in the country, we make reference to the expanded definition, which includes discouraged workers, as I think it gives a truer reflection of the state of unemployment in South Africa. And when doing so, there are around, according to Stats SA, more than 12 million people unemployed, which is equivalent to just under 43% of the workforce. So I think this is really the state of the unemployment crisis in the country. And until we are able to deal with the problems of the structure of the South African economy, I'm afraid that these problems will continue.
Yeah. What is it about the structure of the economy that you believe needs fixing?
So here, there are a number of key factors. One relates to the fact that since 1996, South Africa has embarked on a process of premature deindustrialization. What this means is that the manufacturing sector is the size of the economy, and in relation to employment within the economy, has shrunk dramatically, in part due to the elimination of tariffs from 23% to 8% between 1996 and 2004, which really decimated the most labor-intensive employment sectors in the country, which is manufacturing and particularly clothing and textile workers. So that's really the main thing. The second thing is the continued reliance on the aging mining complex, which is becoming increasingly less labor-intensive over time. And so it doesn't create sufficient a number of jobs to be able to absorb new entrants into the job market. And then I would say these problems are made substantially worse by the fact that government has adopted a neoliberal austerity agenda, which means that there are major cuts to the public sector, which includes cuts to fixed investment. This is investment in the real economy, which can in fact create jobs, whilst there's been a continuation and a rise of investments in the financial economy.
Yeah, let's quickly go to Ziniko. I'm going to come back to you, Dominic. I just quickly need to go back to Ziniko, who is our reporter also covering the story for us this morning. Unfortunately, it is raining where he is currently standing. But Ziniko, I want you to speak quickly about the desperation of some of the people who are unemployed. Day in, day out, some mornings they are outside these intersections in Gauteng trying to work, trying to look for work. Speak to us about that level of desperation.
Good morning, Aldrin. Yes, indeed, there are people who actually braved the rain on a daily basis, as we are seeing today, that there are people who decided not to just wait by the crossroads, as some of them are greeting us as well live on television. So we are focusing this morning on some of the measures people have taken in their quest of finding employment. We're in Midrand, where there are many estates, and of course that's where you find many young and elderly women, setting up across various estates, looking for jobs, waiting for any potential employer to pick them up so that they can go and work for them, whether it's a gardener or there is a cleaner. So one of them is Nobukhosi Ndlovu, who has decided, after struggling to find employment, to set up this fruit and snack store just across one of the busiest intersections here in Midrand. Let's bring her in so that we get more details in terms of how she managed to set up this store, and of course her journey in terms of trying to find employment in this facility. I'm going to bring her in. She still have to sell some products to the customer here. So let's allow her that space to continue with that. So basically, Aldrin, what we also find out is that when it comes to low-income jobs here in South Africa, I'm talking about domestic workers, I'm talking about cleaners. Over the past 5 years, that sector has been shrinking. A lot of jobs have been lost. And of course, in 2023, over 130,000 jobs were lost. As we continue now to talk to Sis Nobukhosi. Sis Nobukhosi, ngicela phambi nje kancane ngiyaxolisa ukuphazamisa. Ngicela usitshele sisi ukuthi uqale kanjani ukudayisa la, nokuthi mhlawumbe ustruggle kanjani ukuthola umsebenzi ekwenze ukuthi ugcine sewudayisa.
Ngoba umsebenzi bengawutholi, akunamsebenzi, sonke siyazi. So ngiqale lana ukudayisa 2021 ngesikhathi kuvulela after icorona. Yikho lapho engiqala ukudayisa khona. Kulapho engifundisa khona ingane zami, lapho engondla khona ingane zami, lapho engibhadala khona irent. Do noma kungabalance mara lokuthi kube khona okuncane okungenayo.
Bekunzima kangakanani ungathola umsebenzi la, ufune umsebenzi isikhathi singakanani, and yini ekwenza ukuthi manje uzugcina usuthi ngidayise ngoba kulunge emsebenzini?
Aboma 4 years ngifuna nomsebenzi ngawutholi. So ngagcina sengibona ukuthi ungqono ngidayise ukwenzela ukuthi ngikwazi ukuphila.
Njengoba uhlala lana, abaningi abantu abafuna umsebenzi la, nokucleaner, nokusebenza endlini phakathi kwabantu lana, ungathini kuba abantu ababhekile ama struggles obabona befacana nawo kanjani?
Baningi mfethu abafika noma nalapha bafika basibuzise nami ukuthi okay sisakwazi lapha abafuna khona abantu abocleaner o lapha abafuna khona ukuchasha, bese ngiyasho nami ukuthi bafethu nami nginje ngiyawufuna umsebenzi mara awu. So nokudayisa nakho nakhona sekunzima ngoba wonke umuntu useyadayisa, sonke siyadayisa, sonke sidinga ukuphila.
Ngiyabonga Sis Nobukhosi isikhathi sakho. Sharp man. That's Nobukhosi Ndlovu there, who's saying that she struggled, to get a job, and of course she searched for a job for over 4 years and she could not find any, but also saying that that's why she decided to venture into this small business, but also saying that many people who come to her just asking, in terms of whether she knows any job opportunities in around this area or not. And of course she does say that eventually she does get into the business and she's able to pay rent, to raise her kids, and of course attend to any of her immediate financial needs. So that's where we are at this point in Midrand. I'll respect to you.
Yeah, let's quickly go back to Dominic. Dominic, if you can hear us. So the conversation that Ziniko just had there with one of the vendors or hawkers in the Gauteng CBD, somewhere in, I think that's in Midrand, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's somewhere in Midrand. Your take on the point that she raises, that it's been about 4 years now that she's been unemployed, and it speaks to this question around long-term unemployment, and we see even with those particular stats that the numbers are increasing. You can also go back to the point that you wanted to raise a bit earlier on, one of the last points around the structure of the economy.
Thanks. Yes, that's correct. 80% of the people who are unemployed are in long-term unemployment, which means that more than half have been unemployed also for more than 3 years. And the duration of unemployment continues to grow, as you say. Yeah, I wanted to point out that the first challenge is the lack of fixed investment. This is investment in the real economy, particularly in sector employment and labor intensive like manufacturing. The second point I wanted to make around the structure of the economy is the prioritization of repaying back debt and budget cuts have resulted in a shrink of the public sector. So here we will lose around 30,000 jobs in 2025 alone from the public sector. And it's also this fixation on financial investment that takes away the resources that needs to go to the real economy. And the third aspect is really around the South African Reserve Bank and its mandate of inflation targeting, which doesn't take into account the mass unemployment crisis. And often when the Reserve Bank hikes interest rates, it acts as a barrier for employment as it reduces the prospects for borrowing for fixed investment in productive sectors of the economy.
Yeah. In conclusion, Dominic, how do we fix that particular aspect when it comes to investing money in industries and sectors that are actually human capital intensive? A point that was raised during the medium-term budget policy statement by some of the experts is that there's nothing wrong with spending around 22 Rand on servicing your debt cost. But the question is, what is that debt for? What did you use the money for? Because that money should actually be used to try and build the economy and create jobs.
Exactly. And at the moment, the government is paying lip service to the idea of industrialization, but their primary path to achieve this is through public-private partnerships and concessional finance, which adds additional risks to the fiscus in terms of debt. It also further allows state capacity. So really what you want to do is to discipline finance capital, direct those resources to invest in public infrastructure, including, for example, energy, rail, on a public goods approach, which means that it's not on a for-profit basis. In this way, you can really start to charge up the South African economy, which would also probably have many downstream job creation activities through the value chain. And here we need to think about, for example, key aspects of the renewable energy value chain that South Africa can gain competitive advantage in to develop a localized renewable energy manufacturing sector.
Yeah. A final one, Dominic, is looking at the advancement of technology and also the introduction of artificial intelligence. The impact that such technological advances have on developing countries like South Africa, where you also have this allegation that is coming from the private sector side, that unfortunately you don't have the right skills to match the type of economy that we're trying to build.
So the first thing is that increased technology has been introduced as part of the productive process for hundreds of years, and it doesn't necessarily result in increased levels of unemployment. Instead, it changes the nature of the labor market. The second point I would make is that the question of the skills mismatch is a misnomer. I think the primary problem here is that we've shifted the emphasis of the South African economy towards finance, insurance, and real estate, which are sectors that are not really employment and labor intensive. And so what we need to do is, and these sectors generally require either extremely highly skilled workers or very, very extremely precarious workers. So what we really need is to develop low and semi-skilled jobs. And these are either in, for example, low-level manufacturing sectors that can then be upscaled over time. And this should really be the focus of a job-creating strategy. And then when we look at it, there's about 1.4 million people who have these kinds of skills in these sectors who are currently unemployed. I think we can add to this by saying we have a number of public sector workers, healthcare workers, educators, or trained professionals who are unemployed in a situation where you have a massive amount of vacancies within education and healthcare. So these are all examples of where we have sufficient skills, adequate skills. And that's not to say that we don't need to upskill over time, but the issue of skills is not the main problem that's impeding us from creating employment. The issue really lies on the demand side, as opposed to, which means that there isn't sufficient demand for labor, and not so much with the problems of supply of labor.
Okay, Dominic Brown there, thank you so much. He's from the Alternative Information and Development Center, ahead of the Q3 unemployment stats that are expected to be released a bit later on today by the Statistician General. So that also informs the poll that we are running today. We're asking you what can be done to solve South Africa's unemployment crisis. These are the options that we have for you: improve education, finance businesses, and tackle corruption. So scan that QR code. It will take you to the landing page and choose any of those 3 options there. You can also drop us an X at Newzroom 405 and leave us a comment on what your take is around the country's unemployment crisis. Improve education, currently at 12%, finance small businesses at 18%, and tackle corruption at 70%. I'd love to hear some of the people who have voted on that 70% around tackling corruption, or how they link unemployment to corruption. Maybe some of the incidents or instances that you have come across where there was a direct link between corruption as well as unemployment. And here's the thing about corruption. Some people say that it's not a violent crime, but here's the thing, it's not a victimless crime. It is not a victimless crime because sometimes it also leads to questions like these, leading to unemployment, and the country's unemployment rate continues to increase. Will we see a downturn in the unemployment rate, considering that we have now had electricity non-stop now since the beginning of the year? Do you think that that could also boost the country's economic activity? And if it does boost the country's economic activity, that may result in some jobs being created. But from what Enoch Otongwana, the Minister of Finance, have indicated, they have decided to revise downward South Africa's GDP forecast for this financial year from 1.3% to 1.1%.